Now in this next chart we see something quite fascinating, which is very related to my well-known prediction from early 2011 about how oil production would exceed demand and oil prices would permanently fall, and that could even be quantified into a precise equation, which you could read about in this video up here in the upper right hand corner. However, if you are watching this as a playlist, then don't interrupt your playlist for that. You can find it on the channel separately. This is U.S. oil production, and yes, the vertical axis begins at 5 million. Ideally, all vertical axes should begin at 0, but in this particular case, that's not necessary if you have any familiarity with the U.S. energy sector. Oil production was 5.5 million barrels a day, and everyone was screaming about peak oil, as though demand would rise without any interruption, but supply production could only fall. They were wrong on both fronts. They were watching the movie Soylent Green just way too often because hydraulic fracturing was taking off. In the early 2000s, the United States funded a lot of basic research into energy, and the nature of basic research is such that you don't know which technology is going to succeed. If you went back to 2002, you didn't know whether it would be hydraulic fracturing or electric vehicles or corn ethanol or algae ethanol or solar power or some combination thereof that would trigger an energy revolution. It turns out that hydraulic fracturing was the one to deliver results first, even though those others did advance, and EVs are also advancing, of course. But for the purposes of this chart, in 2010, when fear about peak oil was the highest, production was already rising. And I made my prediction over here, early 2011, of how oil would be below $70 for the majority of time from that point forward. And the extent to which that disruption is quantified could be simplified into an equation. And fracking caused this oil production to rise, and then the balloon finally popped, oil prices fell. OPEC was able to continuously reduce production to accommodate the supply increase by the US until this point when OPEC just couldn't cut anymore, and oil prices fell from the $100 a barrel that OPEC was keeping it at down to $50 a barrel. And it stayed at $50 a barrel for the next 6 years, from 2015 through the end of 2020 until Trump was replaced by Biden. And hydraulic fracturing in the United States was clamped down on for allegedly environmentalist reasons like stop oil or reduce oil production, but this is only the US. Now, what was amazing was that the world's oil production was 93 million barrels per day. The United States only had to increase that by about 3.5 million barrels per day. So less than 4% increase in world oil supply caused the price to fall by half. Then we increased it even more. So despite the rising demand from emerging markets like China from 2016 through 2020, oil prices still stayed at $50 until the Biden administration clamped down on fracking and obstructed the Keystone pipeline and so forth. Only now has fracking been able to resume due to a combination of more innovation and the boot on the neck of fracking being lifted somewhat by the Biden administration because of the wars in Ukraine as well as in the Middle East that are going on, which could be risky for oil supply. But U.S. oil production has risen to an all-time high. So it is higher even than the previous peak of March 2020. Even though oil consumption in the world is going down, China is importing much less oil than before, even though its economy has grown. U.S. oil consumption is also going down, as I've spoken about on this channel. So production is rising, and soon oil prices will fall pretty dramatically again. So this is quite an important chart for everything economically oriented. And this also explains how brief blips in inflation that occurred when oil drifted up to $80 and $90 a barrel will soon be reversed as well. Thanks for watching.